new 4K has just been announced for a beloved horror franchise that's been dormant for years. And why is that the case? Let's talk about it. Hi, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to tuning into another episode here at Figure Out Films. I'm your host, as always, Chris, and today we are going to talk about the iconic 1984 A Nightmare on Elm Street. The reason we're talking about 1984 is because it's getting a new 4K release, and also because a lot of you in the comments have expressed, Chris, why have you not talked about your number one franchise in our previous video we did, where we ranked the top 10 best franchises? Talk about Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's what I'm going to be doing. So now here in Figure Out Films, what we're going to be doing is talking about the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. We're going to go through each installment, each episode, and at the very end, I will rank all of them. So go ahead and tune in each time. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can tune in to each of those videos and give me your thoughts and your opinions on each movie from this iconic franchise. So today we're going to talk about 1984, the original. What can't be said that hasn't already been said about A Nightmare on Elm Street? Well, how about this? It was actually one of the most profitable horror movies of the year in 1984. Only made for $1.1 million, ended up making $51 million for New Line Cinema, the New Kid on the Block studio franchise that gave Wes Craven an opportunity to put out his new movie. Again, director Wes Craven, iconic for his Hills Have Eyes and The Last House on the Left, finally came up with an idea to combat or to participate with the growing popularity of slasher movies. These slasher movies that stem from, I would argue, Black Christmas, then with John Carpenter's Halloween, that, you know, is one of the greatest independent horror movies. And then you get 3 Friday the 13th movies. And then, you know, what could Wes Craven do to shake up the genre that was spawning so many different slasher movies, mass killer slasher movies? We got a lot of giallos during this time. How about we make someone we can see, but only in our dreams? So in 1984, New Line Cinema puts out A Nightmare on Elm Street, and it just saw overnight success. Not only did it get critically and audience high praise and garner so much water cooler talk and midnight showings, that it actually blew up even more in the home media market with this little baby here. Now, this is a Nightmare on Elm Street sealed VHS copy I have here, yes. But in 1984, when this bad boy hit the VHS market, it blew up. People were talking about it for days on end, and it just grew and grew and grew, and it got so much money made. CEO Bob Shea, so much freaking money, and he said, let's franchise this bad boy. But it did so well, and why is that the case? Why is Nightmare on Elm Street considered one of the greatest horror movies of all time? Why is it so damn iconic? Well, let's talk about it.
We'll see, bitch.
Well, at the time, slasher movies were all the rage. Horror movies were just all the rage. They were so cheap to make and require that you would obviously get your return. The horror genre was just so loyal to slashers during this time that they would support anything that was being put out. And studios did really good money by doing that. They gave a lot of freedoms to a lot of writers and directors and built so many stars throughout these movies. In A Nightmare on Elm Street, I think it separates itself from its contemporaries because we do get Robert Englund as a charismatic and a non-maskless killer. He's wearing a striped Christmas sweater. He's wearing a fedora. He has claws and knives for hands, and he talks. I think that already separates him from all the other slasher movies. And I think that's what resonated so well with audiences in 1984 and continues to do today. I think Robert Englund's Freddy Krueger is just so relatable in terms of the comedy and having a funny sense of humor as the franchise progressed. But in that first movie, I think it's because he was genuinely terrifying. He only famously has like 7 to 9 minutes of screen time in this hour-and-a-half long movie, which smooth like butter. Is one of the easiest horror movies to watch, and it's also one of the scariest. As soon as you start the movie, you get the iconic score that the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise just has on a chokehold. It's just one of the greatest scores, one of the best soundtracks of any horror movie of its time, and maybe even today. You get introduced to our character, Tina, who's in a dreamlike sequence, and we see Freddy Krueger only from a grin. We see a little bit of his eyes, and we're genuinely sucked into this nightmare dream, and luckily she wakes up and then unfortunately has to see that her mom is shagging it up with this short, chubby guy. And no offense, because I'm that short, chubby guy too, but that would freak me out. We get introduced to her friend, Nancy, Glenn, which is her boyfriend, or Nancy's boyfriend, and then Rod, which is Tina's boyfriend as well. The four of them create this awesome friend group that's a little toxic, maybe not in 1984, but it's a little toxic. And there's already another separating thing here. And here's the thing with Nancy, played by Heather Lamkamp, and then her boyfriend Glenn, played by the young Johnny Depp. They all get along. They're not all annoying. You like these characters. You like hanging out with them. You like the interactions they have, and you genuinely care about them. That's already separating yourself from a bunch of other horror franchises during this time. A lot of the times the teenagers are just cookie cutter fodder for the killer. In this movie, you care about each character. And that's why I think when Tina does eventually die in this movie, again, she's our main character, dies pretty quickly in this movie. And one of the most gruesome deaths, Exorcist style, where she's in the dream world, and she gets sucked up to the ceiling and Freddy just slashes her in front of Rod. Is truly one of the most terrifying scenes. She's screaming and hysterical. Not only is she just floating, there's nothing there, but she's getting ripped to shreds. Her blood is everywhere. Her blood is shooting at Rod as well, and it's just all that terrifying. This movie is super graphic in that way. I think that's what resonated with me as a kid too. It's scary because there's a lot of blood. There's a lot of killing in this movie. Even though there's not many characters in this movie, there's a lot of killing. It's just the lulling them, the almost killing them sequences, and just the score as well when they're getting lifted or when Freddy's there. The creep factor is on full octane in this movie, and that's what I think this movie is so awesome. But anyway, when Tina dies, Rod ends up getting arrested, and eventually he dies from Freddy. And Heather Lancaster's character of Nancy goes into the dream world and starts to notice things that this recurring character known as Fred Krueger is killing everyone, and why. She finds out that her parents and other family members had eventually killed his actual human form and somehow became this demon dream monster, and now he's terrorizing the kids of Elm Street. And he has no rules. He has limitless power in this dream world. And a lot of times throughout this movie, it's really hard to tell when they're in a dream sequence or when they're in the real world. And I think Wes Craven does a great job of manipulating the audience into not being able to figure out what is real and what isn't, and like who is safe and who isn't. Because our main character Tina's already died. So who's next? Eventually, we're left with the last two, which is Nancy and Glenn. And Glenn, Johnny Depp's character, I love him. He cares for Nancy, but honestly, he's a little dumb. He has a hard time following the directions that Nancy gives him. Nancy's just so brave. She's truly one of the all-time great scream queen horror characters. She's just so badass, and she just cares so deeply for her friends and her family, which honestly, that's another thing she has to deal with is divorce, which is another horror in this movie. John Saxon and his spouse who can't put a vodka bottle to save her life. The mom in this movie is ridiculous. She has a vodka bottle hidden in every other cabinet, and she's constantly drinking. Honestly, feel for her. Freddy Krueger, played by Robert Englund in this movie, honestly is so terrifying. He does the right balance of comedy and horror. Throughout the other sequel movies, it's a lot more puns and jokes and riffs of other movies for his kills. But in this movie, it's terrifying how he's toying with the victims and he's toying with them in graphic ways. Like he's cutting his fingers off, his face is getting pulled off, and he's grabbing them and ripping their clothes off. And he's laughing while doing it. It's very terrifying. Freddy in this movie is an absolute menace. He's just so freaking scary in this movie. And I think that's also, one of the most important things of this movie is you get a great score and a great theme with your iconic killer, and your killer has personality. That's something different in 1984. I can't think of any movies that did that. And he's not even human. He's like, is he invulnerable? Like, can he die? It doesn't show that until near the end of the movie. Near the end, Nancy figures out she can pull Freddy out from the dream world and plans to pull him out. But before she can do that, Freddy foils her plans by unfortunately killing our love, Johnny Depp, in this movie. In one of the most confusing and gruesome ways, he gets sucked into his bed and then shoots out all his bloody guts to the ceiling in one of the most graphic and chilling scenes I've seen in a horror movie. I don't actually understand how it happens. He gets sucked in and then all the blood gets shot out and it's all around. How do you explain that as a coroner? I really don't know. But this movie, right when Nancy realizes that her boyfriend has died and all her friends are gone, she says, "No more Mr. Nice Girl," and she's going to pull out Freddy. And she successfully does. She pulls Freddy out from the dream world into the real world and starts beating the shit out of him with all her booby traps. It's kind of entertaining, but you got to remember in 1984, this is pretty cutting edge. It's pretty advanced. I mean, seeing your characters fight back against the killer is not very common before 1984. I mean, this feels like almost like a Ready or Not with the Samara weaving. Like this is like the archetype here. You know, this is Laurie Strode in 2018 almost. You know, in 1984. So, you know, Heather Langenkamp really solidifies this role. She's the blueprint for this movie. Eventually, we get one of my biggest critiques in this movie, which is the ending. I don't really I understand it, but I don't like it, I guess. And I don't like how Freddy basically in the real world gets pulled out and he's vulnerable. He doesn't have his powers, and his powers, I mean, he just gets defeated when his victims say, I don't believe in you anymore. I'm taking my power away from you. You're not scary anymore, Boogeyman. And then he, you know, disappears like he's gone. I don't really care for that. I don't really understand it. Yeah, just that's always been my biggest critique, even as an 8-year-old when I was watching this movie, which, yes, I was 8 years old. It just didn't make sense to me. And then the quick transition to Nancy being outside with her mom, which in the couple minutes earlier, her mom is shown as a skeleton being dragged down to hell and vanishing. And then she's there all happy-go-lucky and says, you know what, Nancy, I'm not going to drink anymore. And what's funny is alcoholism doesn't end that soon. Maybe I'm being too realistic, but I just don't understand the tonal shift and the quick transition. And then it's still unclear that are they dreaming or are they in the real world? Because obviously Freddy's back. He's manipulating the car. It doesn't make sense to me. It's always been one of my critiques of this flawless, perfect movie. But that ending just doesn't do it for me. But this movie does have 3 different endings, so you can choose the happy ending that Wes Craven originally wanted, kind of meh, or you can have the theatrical ending that the studio wanted to keep it open-ended for sequels, which I think is the best ending, or you can get the Freddy ending, which is this regular ending with Freddy driving the car at the end. But after that, I mean, New Line Cinema, you know, they hit a home run. This movie made so much money. It made them made them the new kids on the block. They ended up putting out another Nightmare on Elm Street movie. This time directed by their before Nightmare on Elm Street that they had produced and put out, Alone in the Dark. Jack Shoulder comes, moving from that project to Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. And then eventually New Line Cinema just makes so much money from Freddy. That first Nightmare on Elm Street really did make them so much money that they eventually had the buying power to become one of the biggest horror studios of its time, a Blumhouse studio before Blumhouse. They ended up buying Sean S. Cunningham's Friday the 13th franchise and bringing it to New Line. They ended up buying Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre and bringing it to New Line. They ended up doing other iconic franchises down the road with the Final Destination franchise, remakes of Friday the 13th and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They did things like The Hidden. They did sci-fi movies as well. They ended up finally getting Peter Jackson, who was doing horror movies, to do Lord of the Rings, which made them so much money. Where are they now, New Line Cinema? Well, they're really not in that business anymore. The CEO who loved horror movies, Bob Shea, I don't think he was the most fitting CEO later down the line, but at the time, he was willing to give any horror movie a chance, and I wish it was more the case like it is today now, besides just A24 doing the heavy lifting. But that's all I have on A Nightmare on Elm Street. Where were you when you first watched A Nightmare on Elm Street? I know I was watching it with my eyes glued to the screen as an 8-year-old who ended up dressing up as Freddy Krueger and buying all his figures and buying all different variations of his movies and constantly, quoting him as well. Where were you? Sound off in the comments below. What are your thoughts on A Nightmare on Elm Street? Is it your favorite horror movie franchise as well? Which is it? What do you like about it? Let me know down in the comments below. I hope you're all excited to do a deep dive into this franchise as I am. I absolutely love this franchise, and I can't wait to give you my ranking at the very end. So don't forget to tune in on those next episodes by hitting that subscribe button. Other than that, my name is Chris here at Figure Out Films, and remember, if you are not watching A Nightmare on Elm Street, do you really care about cinema? Other than that, I'll see you next time.